When I walk in, every ancestor move. Every cell in my body got an ancient groove. I ain't searching for truth, I embody the proof. You look at me, you see the lineage. Every obstacle shift when I rise in.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome back to another round of My Patriot Report Live. I'm the bridge connecting the next generation to federal contractor. I am Ratwan Hill. With me, I have the man, the myth, the legend, the ambassador of peace. And if you don't know who he is and his pedigree, you might want to ask Anthropic, Mr. Walter Cotton III. Mr. Cotton, how you doing this lovely Monday? How was the weekend?
I had a wonderful weekend. Yes, I had a wonderful weekend.
Yes, sir. Great to hear that. Great to hear that. Let's dive right into it now. That deadline date that we've been talking about, May 2nd, has passed, where either Congress has to pass a War Power Resolution Act or the executive branch has to come back and let them know we want to pull the troops out. Now, where are we at in that perspective? Are we looking at the safe retrieval of our troops and a peaceful departure?
We're supposed to be looking at that, right? Based on the, clear and sober read of the War Powers resolution or act. So from a constitutional perspective, what was supposed to happen on May 2nd was the president was supposed to send a report into Congress detailing his intentions, which were one of two. He only had two choices: either request an extension of an additional 30 days to use the power of the purse to effectuate a safe withdrawal of our troops from harm's way, or to petition the Congress to give him the broader authority to escalate the action. And the fact that the administration chose a third option is quite concerning to me, right? It's quite concerning to me because it signals the possibility of an internal threat to the Constitution that we might want to keep an eye on. But in point of fact, we're at the place now where the action has gone beyond the deadline, and the president is delinquent in taking the appropriate action.
Mm-hmm. Now, this War Power Act resolution, it was sent up to Congress about 4 or 5 times, and I think the last time it.
Well, what you're talking about is a resolution that has been introduced in Congress on a couple of occasions, a couple of times in the House and a couple of times in the Senate, to apparently express the people's opinion about the action in Iran, and that particular vote did not pass on each occasion. And so now we're in a position where the executive branch is delinquent in their duties under the Constitution, and Congress is also delinquent in its duties under the Constitution. Because based on, again, the sober read of this particular provision, at the end of that 60-day time period, the executive branch has an obligation to we the people. He is an obligation to the utilization of the power of the purse. And the fact that, the executive branch is ignoring that obligation, and Congress, and this, in my opinion, is a challenge because my fraternity members are out there in harm's way, right? These are real human beings that are sitting out there in harm's way. And therefore, Congress had an obligation, in my humble opinion, to come back into session and deliver an answer to the executive branch in terms of their interpretation of the executive branch's interpretation of the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I am of the opinion that we need to send a clear and deep-throated message into the Congress that says you all need to get to work. You need to get back to work. And fortunately, for many of our citizens, the senators have office hours in their state. So your senator is in your state this week. You have the ability to go down to his or her office and knock on the door and say to him or her, listen, we need to make a decision about this situation in Iran. On the Congress side of the equation, they're in session, but they're not scheduled to take any formal votes until the 11th or 12th of May, I think. And so our opportunity is to flood their phone line with the same request that says, hey, listen, you've got our guys, you've got our men and women out there in harm's way. And based on our sober read of the Constitution, something needs to be done now. And the reason this is so important is because that's a powder keg over there. That's a powder keg over there in that Strait of Hormuz. And in the event that the creek rocks and the wind blows the wrong way and one of our ships is affected, right, that's going to change the sentiment of the American people, and in point of fact, we should not be there, right, based on the clear and sober read of the Constitution. We should be in a process, a posture, if you will, of bringing our troops home in the safest way possible, or going through the process of implementing the people's desire in this situation, right? Congress telling the executive branch what we want to do under these circumstances. But the fact that we have none of that going on puts us in a position where there could be an event that we have to react to, and it all could have been avoided with a little bit of governance. It all could have been avoided with a little bit of proactive management. And I'm encouraging every true patriot that's within the sound of my voice to take up this charge, right? Go down to your senator's office, pick up the phone and call your senator today and tell him or her they need to get back into the DC and vote on a war powers action as it relates to this issue in Iran. The same thing with your congressional representatives. Consider this, like a preseason for our Contract Our Veterans Voting Act effort. Or as a matter of fact, include that in the conversation. Say, by the way, while you're, making a decision to make America safe again by getting our men and women out of harm's way, also pass this legislation that is 20 years past due to give him and her an opportunity to be able to experience the American dream when they get home. The ability to self-determine more liberally once they get home. I didn't mean to use that L word because I know you guys consider that profanity, but the point that I'm simply making is you need to have a conversation with your representative. The office that was set up by the first branch, the first act of the Constitution. What am I thinking of? Okay, you got the executive branch that was created by the second act. The congressional branch was created by the first act, and the judicial branch was created by the third act. They created the House of Representatives as the first action in establishing the Constitution because of its importance in order of decision making. And right now, these individuals have both the power of the purse and statutory authority to take rack and pinion steering in a situation where I fear there are powers that be that don't have America's best interest at heart that are at the helm.
Sir, now you said this terminology. Well, first, before I talk about the power of the purse and getting into Article 1, you said that early on, you was like that they're on a third option. They're using the third option. So if by law, statute, constitution, it was only really two options, and we on a third option, does that mean that we're operating outside of constitutional rights? And then
yes, we're operating outside of, I think, the spirit and intent of the Constitution when we utilize super legislative authority to manipulate the Constitution, right? To change the interpretation of the Constitution based on the whims of a single administration or the whims of a single individual. And that is very, very dangerous action. And so what we want to do is rein this action in, right? That's why we are blessed to live in this constitutional republic where we, the people, right, have the authority to have our sovereign voice heard. And if there was ever a time in the history of these United States of America, it's at this 250th anniversary that we, the people, need to reassert our authority. We need to restate our intentions. Our good friend Sophia Nelson wrote a book called Redefining Freedom. I got it this past weekend, broke it open and started reading it. The wisdom, the proactive ideas and concepts that this young lady places in this book is amazing. I'm going to beg her to come on and be a guest on the program in future weeks so that she can discuss some of the needs that we have right now as we reimagine the Constitution. We reimagine freedom for this generation. I mean, that's the thesis in her book. Her book basically suggests that each generation needs to take advantage of the authorities that were vested in it by the Constitution, by being a member of a constitutional republic, and redefine freedom for that generation, right? Mm-hmm. The freedom that worked in 1776, right, when we had a agriculture-based economy, are not the same freedoms that we need in an information-based economy where AI has the ability to mimic just about everything, right? The laws and rules that governed an industrial economy are a different set of laws and rules that we'll need to judge or manage a information economy. And so what I'm encouraging, and taking a letter directly out of Miss Nelson's book, I'm encouraging we, the people, to start the process now by taking control of an action that will make sure that our fellow servicemen and women are out of harm's way.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Now, you said a mouthful, but I want to go back to the power of the purse. Now, what does that mean? What does the power of the purse mean exactly? Like, where is that coming from? What is the root of the power of the purse? Where does that come from?
It comes from the Constitution. The Congress, the House of Representatives, is vested with the authority to determine how the taxpayers' dollars are going to be spent. And there is an appropriations process that they go through, again, woven into the Constitution, that explains how those distributions are supposed to be planned. And once those distributions are set up, those distributions, again, set up by the Congress, are not supposed to be disturbed. They're not supposed to be disturbed by the executive branch, right? And we had some shenanigans in the past. I'm thinking back to the Nixon administration, right, where there were dollars appropriated and, organized to be distributed in a way by the Congress that the president decided in his autonomous capability that he would use another way. And they came up with a new act. It's called the Orphan. It's not the Orphan.
Impoundment. Impoundment.
What is it? The Impoundment Act. That's what it is. They came up with the Impoundment Act, which basically reinforced in the mind of the president that he did not have the power of the purse, right? If the president is utilizing the tax dollars without the authority of the representatives, the people's representatives, that is taxation without representation. That's what the king warned about when he came here and spoke before the Congress a couple of days ago. He reminded us that over 160 times, our historic Supreme Courts have referenced the Magna Carta, right? Which was the taxation without representation challenge for the English. That led to our Tea Party. And we're in a situation right now where I fear that if we continue to see these violations of the impoundment clause, like we saw with the East Wing, where a unilateral decision was made to rip that thing down. And now I fear we're seeing some action that is going to cause the cost of that to go back on the taxpayers, right? That would be an example, in my opinion, of a violation of the impoundment clause, right? The shenanigans over at the Kennedy Center. It's clear as day in the Constitution, right? But that action to put the president's name on the Kennedy Center and shut it down for 2 years, again, this is an example of what I believe is a violation of the impoundment clause. There are a number of other examples of that, to include the recent effort in the form of an executive order that came out to attempt to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, which I understood had some $54 million price tag associated with it. Well, I agree with the fact that, George Washington, coined the Department of War back in the day when he was sailing across the Potomac to protect us against the British, right? But we've evolved to a different place now, right? We've evolved to a more kindler, gentler group of humans. And so there is an argument that one could make for eliminating the charge towards war and replacing it with a charge towards peace. That's why I took on that role of the peace ambassador, because I believe that we are at a point in our evolution as a race of human beings that we can see that cooperation is a better strategy versus competition. And under that particular mindset or strategy, we can envision and deliver a more perfect union.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, okay, when you said super legislation? Super
legislative majority. Yes.
Super legislative, that's a mouthful. What does that mean exactly? Super legislative majority.
My lane is business, and I don't like to traverse into legal or political lanes because I make mistakes, and like I made a mistake when I talked about what was that thing I was promoting aggressively, 42 USC 1986, where I suggested that our contracting officers had to be concerned about, a civil suit. And, I had this big grandiose argument built up in my head that was standing on a foundation of sand. That was within the Civil Rights Act, and it was an interpretation that didn't apply. So let me correct that for the record right now. I was wrong about 42 USC 1986 being a threat to our contracting officers, and equally wrong about their ability to use that to protect themselves against these illegal actions that they're being asked to take on behalf of this administration. So let me make sure that I correct that. But I'm going back to this definition, or explaining what the super legislative majority produces. It produces a situation where if there is a interpretation in law, the legislature gets to decide it, not the people, right? Not the representatives of the people, but the legislators get to decide it. So I'll give you a perfect example of something that happened recently that was decided by the legislators that may have been better decided by another group, but it was in the Byron Allen Comcast case that was around the area of discrimination and the Civil Rights Act. And in that particular instance, Byron Allen sued Comcast, I think it was, because they violated, in his opinion, his civil rights. And so Byron sued Comcast. The case was heard at the circuit court level, and ultimately the case was appealed to the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court didn't hear the case. The Supreme Court remanded the case back down to the lower court with instruction. But one of the instructions that the Supreme Court remanded the case back down with, changed the definition of discrimination in America forever. Prior to that Byron Allen case, the definition, or in order to prove that you had been discriminated against, you as an individual had to prove that the actions that caused the offense likely included your race. The Supreme Court decision, or should I say remanding of that decision in the Byron Allen case, changed that measure from likely to include race to but for race, which is a much, much higher bar and measure. And again, that changed the definition of discrimination enterprise-wide, right, for the entire country. How important was that? Well, it reared its head in the Louisiana voters' right case. And Justice Clarence Thomas actually wrote in his opinion that but for is the standard. And so this is an example of how a super legislative majority can become a threat to the operation of a document like the Constitution, where a let's say executive branch that's operating with a tremendous amount of hubris can say they reinterpret the War Powers Act to suggest that because the president says terminated, because the president says hostile actions have terminated, that they have terminated, and that there is no need to follow any of the other edicts that are written in plain settled law. And in the event that that action doesn't get challenged by a engaged Congress that comes in and does its job, it's possible that that issue may make its way into the courts because some interested party sues the government. And that particular case, albeit slow, makes its way into the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decide as they decided in the voters' right case. That's how you get a super legislative majority to tinker with the spirit, the intention of a great document like our Constitution.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, I want to bring this back to what, our focus on economic empowerment, radical economic empowerment. Now, how does that directly affect government contracting? Like, from what I'm hearing you say that it could be like in the form of the disruption in the 8A, where they have the Ultima lawsuit in place. How does that have a trickle down effect into the government contract? How does that affect the dollars and where they're allocated? Like, does small business, service disabled veteran business, does it make them more at risk of being disenfranchised?
It affects government contracting in many ways. I'll use this, and I keep missing that word. What is the act where they're
Empowerment? The
Impoundment Act. I'll use the Impoundment Act as an example of how a constitutional violation could affect contracting, because as a result of the rush to dismantling DEI in our acquisition systems, we saw a number of actions and behaviors that were violations of the Constitution, like, for example, the decision to shutter the Minority Business Development Agency. Right? This is an agency that was funded by Congress, right? I know because I was there when the bill was passed, right? And so the president does not have the unilateral authority to take that budget and not spend it as Congress has intended. But that actually happened. That's an example of how this misbehavior could affect us on a contracting level. The change in the definition of discrimination emboldened groups like the Ultima lawsuit team that has taken our 8A program and disrupted it so that it is no longer the reliable asset that we once used in our acquisition system. And that change, albeit small, has had a reverberating effect on our acquisition process. And that reverberating effect is going to start revealing itself in the third and fourth quarter of this fiscal year. Why? Because our contracting officers are going to find that without the benefit of that 8A sole source contracting authority that they once liberally used, they've got more money in the coffers than they have months left to spend, right? And so you're going to see all kinds of shenanigans as we approach the end of the fiscal year that will violate contracting laws and therefore potentially violate contractors' civil rights. So there are a lot of disruptive shenanigans that come out of utilizing a super legislative majority to try to control a partisan interest. And that's why we are aggressively urging, right, our true patriots to join us, right, as we hyper focus on this radical economic patriotism, right? It's not partisan, it's not left, it's not right. It's what's in the best interest of these United States of America that helps us make America safe again. And one of the first things that we need to do is we need to reestablish our economic foundation from sea to shining sea. We need to reshore our manufacturing assets, right? We need to shore up our supply chains. We need to make sure that we got the right tool for the right job. And what I mean by that is, those contractors out there that are, exploiting this situation, right? Like we talked about in that VA electronic health record system, right? We need to take another look at these contractors that we have these relationships with that are exploiting our system, and we need to replace them with contractors that are going to be firm but fair, right? So this is a season where we have an opportunity to reimagine these United States of America in a way that it again dusts off or shakes off the dust of history and becomes that shining city on a hill that everybody wants to emulate.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. Now, how does we talked about contracting and how this affects contracting. What about the people, the regular people who are not entrepreneurs that are not in contracting? Does it have an effect does it affect them, the people who are not in government contracting?
Yeah, it has an effect on them because the truth of the matter is the events that have occurred in the Middle East, every economist that you talk to has created downrange economic pain that's going to result in job loss. It's going to result in a recession in some communities, and they're suggesting that it's going to result in famine and depression in other communities. And so for those of you who are citizens that may be in AI's crosshairs, right? You're a part of that white collar community that's about to be decimated by the technology revolution. Your opportunity is to make sure that these rules and regulations are fair so that when you have your turn at bat, right, in the acquisition batting cage, you get a fair pitch. You have a fair opportunity to participate because your ability to hit that ball and not a home run, just get on first is going to be the difference between your family being able to sustain itself and insulate itself during these turbulence and you being in a soup line with the rest of the people.
Wow. Yeah. That's hectic. That's very hectic. Now, we've been driving this message of having all the true patriots to push ask their Congress to co-sponsor the Contract Out Veterans Act and Veteran Member Business Loan Act. Would you add an additional call to action that states that we want you guys to rein the executive branch in and stop this action that's going on, so we could, we already at a point where it's going to affect us, but at least lighten the blow. Yeah, minimize the blow that is happening to us. Yeah.
Yeah, we do believe that the question that we are raising here, the question that we're calling about the constitutionality of the way things are being done in the Middle East, does have it requires our full attention, right? Because that's a patriotic issue that is affecting us economically, and it's affecting us economically. All you got to do is ride down to your local gas pump to see how it's affecting you, and that's very soon going to show up in your grocery store. So we believe that this action that we're asking you to take in terms of calling your congressman, calling your senator, and having them focus their attention on a resolution to this situation in the Middle East is a economic, it is a patriotic, it is a requirement that we'd like you to add to the request that we're making, that you contact your congressman and your senator about the Contract Our Veterans Act, along with the credit union bill. What's the actual name of that bill, Mr. Hill?
Veteran Member Business Loan Act.
The Veteran Member Business Loan Act. But at the end of the day, this is our season to gain rack and pinion steering on the Congress so that we can minimize the number of shenanigans that we're going to see moving forward. Because I fear that if history is any predictor of what we can expect in the future, I'm not optimistic that we're going to get better governance decisions out of an administration that has put us in this kind of quandary.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, guys, if you would call your Congress, send a letter. We also set up a website, and you can look at our previous podcast where you can easily just take the template and put it into the democracy.io website we set up, where you can directly find your congressmen and representatives and send a email into them asking them that they co-sponsor the Contract Our Veterans Act, Veteran Member Business Loan Act, and additionally ask them to come and rein the executive branch in so we could lighten the blow that we're all going to experience as patriots. And guys, on that note, I am Ratwan Hill, and that is the Mr. Walter Cotton III. Until next time, guys.